I think in the grand scheme of the medium's history, gaming's at a bit of a low point. Pointless re-releases and remakes of games that don't deserve them, projects being littered with controversy left and right, and companies pushing the needle on how greedy you can get. It's definitely been worse in the past, but if you compare where we are now to the late 90s, early 2000s, calling it a comparison in the first place is a bit of a misnomer. That being said, I think we're making progress. Take a look at Balatro. It's an indie dev's first project, and there was a genuine chance it could have won Game of the Year. Now we all know those award ceremonies really don't mean anything and are rigged more than a Minecraft speedrun, but it's the fact that it was up there with stuff like Black Myth Wukong, Astrobot, and Final Fantasy that speaks volumes. It's an absolute hero story, which I think can be said for the game we're going to be discussing today as well. Expedition 33 is a JRPG created by a band of disillusioned industry vets, people with no prior experience, and guys found on obscure French gaming boards. It sounds like a horror story, but that's actually what makes it so special. Team Sandfall had a unique vision that couldn't be created by a AAA studio. They followed through with it, and they ended up creating what many are already describing as a must-play classic. How it contends with other mainstays of the genre might be a topic for another video, but I want to take time to really praise Expedition 33 and what it does well. It's not every day we get a game like it, so I figure I'd throw my hat into the ring and talk about why I think it deserves to win Game of the Year. For me, the best thing about Expedition 33 is how it circumvents problems that some people have with turn-based RPGs. One complaint I often hear about the genre is that the gameplay can get boring and tedious after a while, which makes sense if you're in a game for upwards of 50 or 100 hours. I loved Persona 4 Golden, but I wasn't coming back for its gameplay 60 hours in. I was pretty much doing the same stuff I was doing 10, 20, 50 hours earlier. How does Expedition 33 solve this? Simple. By doing a little stealing. Now, obviously I'm joking when I say that the devs quote-unquote stole these mechanics. In reality, they probably just saw how much people liked these systems, saw how they could work in Expedition 33, and bingo bongo, there you have it. Active combat in your turn-based RPG. To break it down, you're given a number of defensive options when attacked. You can dodge, parry, or occasionally go for gradient counters. Dodges are the most lenient, parries are tighter but can allow for counterattacks if you parry every part of an enemy's attack, and then gradient counters are reserved for countering big super moves, that sort of thing. These abilities add an extra layer of depth to enemies, where instead of just learning weaknesses, you have to learn timings, recognize when to go for gradients, etc., etc. They take an otherwise very passive genre and imbue it with mechanics straight out of Dark Souls. Even when it isn't the player's turn, there's always something for the player to engage with. It allows for an even higher skill ceiling in addition to normal JRPG stuff like building a team comp and choosing which moves to equip for every party member. Speaking of the characters, that's a second part of how the game keeps its combat fresh. Long story short, every character has their own mechanic. Take Mael for example. Depending on what move she uses, she'll enter a stance, which gives her various buffs. It incentivizes using different moves to keep the buffs active, which also helps prevent spamming the same attack over and over again. As my favorite example for this idea, Versa's mechanic is literally just Devil May Cry's style system. The more damage he does and less he takes, the more effects he can proc. But let me reiterate here. They put a DMC style meter into a turn-based RPG. They put a DMC style meter into a turn-based RPG. The way they implemented it was pretty simple, which makes you wonder why no one's tried this prior. In all honesty, I just find it really funny that they put this in here. All of this helps keep the combat from being too stale, as you're constantly engaging with different mechanics and systems. It might sound overwhelming, but they drip feed each one to you over the course of the first 10 to 15 hours. Mileage might vary in that department. In any case, you've got more than enough time to familiarize yourself with a mechanic and implement it into your gameplay before the next one's added. Once everything clicks, it's just the best feeling. The game doesn't just borrow from DMC and Dark Souls, though. It also copied the homework of what I'd say is probably the most successful JRPG series since Pokemon, Persona. It's got social links between the party members, although it's not really a romance system. No romancing classmates, spirits, falsely accused detectives that were definitely 100% framed, or teachers. I know at least one guy out there is punching his wall right now in anger. I know who you are. Instead of romancing your party members, it's more so a way to flesh them out. I think it's a pretty clever use of the concept, as it's not implemented until you unlock the character Verso. Unlike the others, he doesn't know anyone, so you're learning about the other characters right alongside him. It's a really clever and immersive way of implementing character development, as, you know, they have to rest and make camp sometime. What do you do when you're sitting around a campfire with people and you're not tired enough to fall asleep? You talk. It just makes sense. Other than what I've already said, I don't really have too much to say on the whole social link aspect of Expedition 33. I just think it's neat. That being said, it does segue into one of the other aspects of the game that I do really appreciate: how it handles its storytelling. As I mentioned previously, I think the game's writing is really immersive, in that the dialogue and when characters give exposition always makes sense in context. It's fairly rare that anyone outright explains what an established thing in the world is. Expedition 33 expects you to be on the same page as its characters. This all ends up making sense in universe, but I think in practice, it's a bit dicey. To illustrate this, I need to go on a little tangent. Dark Souls is a very cryptic game series that doesn't really explicitly tell the player a ton about its world. You're just dropped into Lord Dren Lothric or Drangleic and told to go beat that big guy, and it just kind of works. I think this approach to storytelling works in this case because, at its core, I don't really consider Dark Souls a story-based game. Essentially, all the actual stories happened before you came around. However, this doesn't impact the game you're playing, because that's not really what it's about. At its core, Dark Souls is about persevering through insurmountable odds for a seemingly impossible goal. Expedition 33, however, is very much so a story-focused game. So much so that I feel the need to stress this. If you haven't played it yet, and there's even the slightest chance at all you might be interested in doing so, do not Google anything about this game. You will get spoiled and miss out on massive bombshells that really need to hit hard. I'm talking Sephiroth killing Aerith levels of oh shit moments. Those are the level of spoilers that I'm talking about here. As I was saying, this is a very story-focused game. It not explaining some of its main ideas or concepts is very, very bold. Imagine if in Star Wars, Obi-Wan never explained the Force to Luke. You'd probably eventually pick up on what it sort of is supposed to be, but you'd likely be confused for a decent while there. The game does this with past events, villains, character relationships, just about everything, really. You're required to piece a lot of context for the story together in your story-based game. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, though. To a point, I can understand the thought process behind the writers. The characters already know about the Gamage, the Paintress, Chroma, and Pictos, all of these different things, events, etc. Why would they exposit what they all already know about? If we're talking about writing these characters realistically, I don't think they will be explaining these things to each other. It's for that reason that, despite not being a massive fan of how they went about doing so, I think this general lack of exposition for a more immersive story experience is commendable. In an age of absolute shit being shoveled onto our screens and into our games, it's nice to not be treated as a block-sucking toddler every once in a while. The last thing that I really want to applaud Expedition 33 on is living up to its name. It's an expedition, an adventure, and it does a pretty damn good job at feeling like one. This is a much less important thing than innovative introductions of mechanics or unconventional storytelling choices. But it's something that I've really missed in, well, media in general. One of my favorite series growing up was Indiana Jones. It was the quintessential adventure blockbuster. It was the perfect globetrotting story. You had rich history, varying locales, and it was all in service of stopping the classically evil bad guy. It was pure wonder for a kid like me. It made the world feel massive, like it was my oyster. In the realm of video games, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon was and is my favorite adventure game. The feeling of exploring mazes and labyrinths of all shapes, sizes, and locales with one of the best scores I've ever heard in a game. It's an amazing experience that does a great job at making each area feel distinctly different from one another. It just sells that feeling of going on an adventure. And I'm happy to say that Expedition 33 hits those same notes for me. Now, it doesn't hit them as hard as Mystery Dungeon, but the fact that it's hitting those notes regardless is pretty damn impressive. Its levels make the most out of Unreal Engine 5, creating some of the most creative and awe-inspiring landscapes you've ever seen. It really seems like the level designers were just allowed to have fun while making their game, which is always great to see. When I got to the underwater level and saw the blend of coral reefs with French architecture, something clicked in me. I realized I'd never seen something like that before. And if you're thinking that nowadays, you've really found something special. I don't think Expedition 33 is a perfect game. It's got its issues, but I didn't want this video to be a review of the game. I just want to praise it for taking risks, aiming for the stars, and not being like any game you've played before. In spite of my problems with it, I do genuinely think it deserves to win Game of the Year. It's not just a good game, it's a good game that tries to push the medium forward. I think that deserves recognition and celebration. Thank you for watching.